So Cindy Sherman belongs to a generation of American artists based on the East Coast of the United States, mainly a generation that came to maturity in New York City, in Manhattan. She's an artist who belonged to a group, to a movement, if we can call that a movement, called the Picture Generation. It's a group of artists that involves Cindy Sherman, that involve the artist Richard Prince, the artist Barbara Kruger, and many others who decided that they would actually use the inflation of images and iconography around them in order to produce work, as if they didn't want to add more images to the world. One of the artists from this generation, very close to Cindy Sherman, for instance, is Sherry Levin, who decided to literally appropriate, copy, if you want, existing images from the history of modernist painting to the history of photography. Cindy Sherman belongs to this movement, though she takes a little bit of an oblique approach to that by producing images that are not the exact replica, if you wish, of pre-existing data of information. But actually the notion of data of information is very central to understand this moment in art history, as this is the moment, late 70s, mid 70s, early 80s, when the notion of data, of reproduction of images through popular culture, through magazines, through fashion, through cinema, television, and of course the early stage of digital culture later on is really surrounding the artist. So Cindy Sherman grew up on the East Coast of the United States. Actually, as a young person, she was very much into what you will see later on in her career. She would love to disguise herself. She would love to pass for an old lady when she was a teenager. So she was very much into this idea of masquerade, this idea of costume, this idea of makeup, this idea of, let's say, multiple personality, the idea of wearing a mask. She grew up with film culture, she grew up in front of the TV screen, she grew up learning from images that were reproduced, either in magazines or in books of art history. One of the premises of her work, the soul, the directed line, the core of her work, is that she, from beginning to end, from the mid-1970s to this day, Cindy Sherman does self-portrait. She works on self-portraiture. So every single image that you are going to encounter in this exhibition are self-portraits of Cindy Sherman. She, from the very beginning of her work, took photos, images, portrait of herself. This is her. She is her own material. She is the object and the subject of her work, though doesn't mean that this is necessarily about her autobiography. With this idea of self-portrait, she has almost exhausted, or she is attempting to exhaust, all the mode of representation available to her fingerprint, the way portrait has existed, has been produced, has been exhibited, has been reproduced in the history of images. And I say the history of images because she goes beyond the history of art or the history of high art. It will be there, but I would say that it's not exactly where she starts. But she made a deliberate attempt to produce a taxonomy of portraits, from again popular culture to high art to these days Instagram. Actually, it's a fascinating experience to go to her Instagram account and see the work that she produces and actually make available through social media. Within the genre of portraiture and self-portraiture, she kind of turns it around and, for instance, if you go to the Met, if you go to the Louvre, if you go to encyclopedic museum or historical museum and you enter 18th, 19th century room and you go to the portrait room, most of the time you will see a very strong gender domination. Most of the time the people who are the object and the subject of portraits are men on horses, men on a cross, sitting on a throne, a self-portrait of artists in the studio. The large majority of his portrait, the large majority of representation in the art history have been dedicated to people who look more like me than Cindy Sherman. So when you look at this exhibition, the topic of her work might be a deconstruction or a critique, if you will, of the male gaze, the way men have been representing themselves and their culture. So here you'd see mostly women. There are, I think, 5 portraits that you can identify with male in the exhibition. Though you can also push that to the next level, that Cindy Sherman is actually thinking in a binary way, in male and female, what tells us that this is the only gender existing in the body of work that she has produced. And that I would leave that with a question mark, but actually when we look at her work today, and that was also the strength of the work, is that the work keep resonating with the time we live in. And I think we can actually totally look at this exhibition and thinking on the debate, the conversation, the discussions that are existing right now, that are very present, very important about the notion of non-binary gender and gender fluidity. But let's go back to Cindy Sherman right now in this room where we are standing in almost geographical center of the Cindy Sherman exhibition, Metamorphoses. It's quite an extraordinary exhibition, a retrospective of the artist Cindy Sherman. All the works that you are going to discover in this exhibition belong to one institution in the United States, in Los Angeles, an institution that was created by a collector, Eli and Edith Broad, who over many years have collected Cindy Sherman, which gave us the opportunity to organize this exhibition that covers the career of Cindy Sherman from the very beginning, from the earliest stage of her work to the most recent years of her practice. And I'm mentioning that because I think it's quite an extraordinary gesture for a collector who actually decided later on to make his collection public with a museum in Los Angeles, but also to share it with other institutions like us. I think it's quite extraordinary to decide to make a choice of collecting an artist in depth. It's fantastic for the artist because an artist then knows that their legacy is protected and that many different visitors, many different audiences all over the world will be able to benefit from their support of the artist. And as an institution dedicated to living artists, I think there is also a model of collecting here that it's not good to have one work, it's not good enough, it's always great, but to make this commitment to really follow the evolution of an artist makes the collection extremely special.